The government announced a temporary cap on the number of immigrants who will be allowed into Britain. The cap applies only to countries outside the European Union, and it will last until April next year, when the government plans to announce a long-term annual limit on immigration. The issue of immigration was, of course, a very sensitive one during the recent general election. It was Gordon Brown's exchange with a voter on the subject that led the then Prime Minister to condemn her as bigoted, forgetting as he did so that the comment would be caught on a radio mic he was wearing. The Conservative campaign promise was to reduce the level of immigration to tens of thousands. I discussed this week's announcement with Philip Le Grain, a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics European Institute, and with Douglas Murray from the Centre for Social Cohesion think tank. And I asked Douglas Murray whether the proposed cap is desirable.
I think it's a very good step in the right direction. It's the beginning of uniting of a sense that the public has had for many years that immigration needs to be better controlled, and the political class that has by and large ignored this concern. I think, in other words, it's a great way to close the growing deficit that's occurred between the politicians and the people in recent years.
Philip Le Grain.
I think this immigration cap makes no sense at all. I mean, it targets only highly skilled workers from outside the EU, because less skilled workers are already banned from coming in legally. And it just flies in the face of reality. We live in a global economy where companies are increasingly having to redeploy people around the world, where people are moving around. We need to attract the best talent in order to succeed in global markets. We need to fill shortages quickly when they arise. And we need an open and flexible immigration system that makes that possible.
What about the basic politics of this, though? As Douglas Murray says, it is something that clearly worries people, and politicians have a duty to respond.
Well, if you saw during the election campaign, the worries were mainly expressed about East European workers. There was famously Gillian Duffy. And
this is the woman, of course, who met the Prime Minister, and he then accused her of being bigoted. Yeah.
Exactly. And this cap does absolutely nothing to address that. It's tinkering on the edges. It makes scarcely any difference to the numbers whatsoever. What it does do is it targets people with high skills who British business need, especially if we're going to grow our way out of recession, if we're going to generate the tax revenues to fill the deficit. And it seems completely bonkers, flying in the face of the government's claim that it's open for business.
You're looking slightly startled, Douglas.
No, skilled workers will still be able to come into this country. The government has simply put a cap on, or wants to put a cap on, to make sure that it is, in their own words, tens of thousands of people who are coming into this country every year, rather than hundreds of thousands. Countries can't simply open their borders for everyone who would like to come in. In the case of Britain, that's a very substantial number of people in the world. The country obviously can't hold them. You have to have some kinds of restrictions. There can't be a limitless number because, among other things, a limitless number of immigrants puts terrible strains on public services. It puts terrible strains on other issues in the country which are, as it were, non-economic. Actually, there are much bigger debates. There are some things in life that are even bigger than economics.
Well, just to address directly Philip Le Grain's point about the nature of the people who will be capped, because it's difficult to see who it won't be if it's not skilled workers.
Firstly, there are 2.5 million people in this country out of work. Very many more people are going to be out of work in the coming months and years if the government's necessary cuts go ahead. That means then presumably that if you believe that we should have a limitless number of so-called skilled labourers coming in, that means that obviously these are jobs which none of these millions of people who are unemployed in Britain could possibly do. Not feasible that they could manage to do these jobs. It simply isn't the case that that's the case. And the reason why is this. Among others, the claim is made that Indian Bengali restaurant workers are skilled workers. It would, I think, come as a surprise to very many people in this country that chefs and others who work in restaurants would count as highly skilled workers. And are these honestly jobs that there are nobody in this country could possibly do? I don't think so.
Well, Philip Le Grain, deal with that, and with the point that Douglas Murray makes, which is that we are looking at the possibility of higher unemployment in this country. The workforce is here already. Why do we need more people from outside?
The point is that we're not talking about a choice between limitless immigration. What we're talking about is whether it makes sense to restrict even further the number of highly skilled workers coming into this country. First of all, some businesses won't be able to attract the people they need. So, for example, you're a small business, you've just got an export order to export to China, you can't find the right engineers you need locally. If the cap is filled, you won't be able to fill that export order. British jobs will be lost as a result. If you're Google, when America tightened its visa restrictions after 9/11, Google wasn't able to attract many of the skilled technicians that it needed, and it moved many of its operations out of the United States precisely for that reason.
All right, sorry, before I come back to you, Douglas Murray, I just want to explore a little bit the second point that Douglas Murray made, which is that this isn't just an economic issue, it is a cultural issue too. Unlimited immigration changes the culture of the country, and people are uneasy about that.
How many American bankers do you know who use the NHS? Very few. How many Indian IT workers do you know who are coming here in such large numbers that they are changing the culture of this country? This is a false debate. I mean, what are the political issues about immigration? There are things like housing. We don't have enough social housing. We ought to build more. There are things about public services which don't respond quickly enough to people's changing needs, whether that is people moving around within the country or people coming into the country. There are also issues at the low-end skill level about wages and jobs. They certainly don't apply to, attracting highly skilled workers that British businesses need to compete with.
The other point, Douglas Murray, is surely that this has only really a limited application, this cap, because of the point that's always made that EU immigration we can't stop, couldn't stop even if we wanted to.
This cap on skilled migrant workers addresses one part of the immigration problem. It's not itself the solution, but it could be part of a solution, or at least part of the way of getting towards a solution to what has become a very, very serious problem in this country. Now, there are all sorts of other things that will have to come up and will have to at some point in the future be debated. Among them will be whether or not we do want to have unlimited amounts of immigration from our European partners. I think that's something that will be discussed down the road. I wish it were able to be discussed now.
We have this figure of getting the figure down from hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands. What do you think it should be? Put a figure on it.
I can't put a figure on it. I think that roughly the figure that the government has come out with...
But that's just a temporary measure.
It is a temporary measure. It is not nothing to try to begin to grapple with this question. This is a debate about the British people and Britain and what Britain is and what it would like to remain. Whether it has an identity it can retain, whether it has a culture it can retain, or whether we want to continue an era, as Philip would have us continue, of mass immigration, which poses many, many problems as well as bringing benefits, many problems which government in this country has not even begun to try to deal with.
Douglas Murray and Philippe Le Grain.